The phone on my nightstand wasn't just vibrating, it was having a seizure. It rattled against the wood with a furious, desperate energy, a sound that drilled directly into my skull. Even with my eyes closed, I knew. I could feel the heat of their collective rage radiating through the device. A tidal wave of indignation transmitted across state lines, aimed directly at me. It was a familiar feeling, that focused beam of familial disappointment, but this time it was supercharged, glowing with a white-hot intensity I had never felt before. When I finally summoned the will to reach for it, the screen was a chaotic mosaic of notifications, a digital monument to their fury. My mother, Carol, was leading the charge. "Jennifer, where in God's name are you? Your sister is hysterical." "You are being incredibly selfish. You need to answer your phone right now." My father, Richard, followed with his signature tone of authoritative disappointment. "This is the most disrespectful and irresponsible stunt you have ever pulled. We are waiting for an explanation. Call us immediately." And then, the one designed to be the killing blow, the emotional shiv twisted between my ribs. It was from my sister, Olivia, crafted with the simple, devastating precision of a lifelong artist of blame. "You ruined our vacation." My thumb hovered over her name. I waited for the usual wave of guilt to wash over me, the familiar sick churning in my stomach that always accompanied their disapproval. But it didn't come. Instead, there was just a vast, quiet stillness. It was the eerie calm after a tornado has ripped through a town, leaving behind a landscape so completely altered that you can't even remember what it looked like before. This storm hadn't just appeared out of nowhere. It had been building on the horizon of my life for 30 years. To them, this was a sudden, inexplicable act of war. To me, this was the day I finally stopped praying for the rain to stop and simply walked out of the storm. Just 1 week prior, I was sitting at that very dining table, the one made of polished mahogany that my annual bonus had paid for, trying to peel my silk blouse off a patch of sticky dampness on my arm. Leo, one of Olivia's 4-year-old twin boys, had been using me as his personal climbing structure, and in a moment of unrestrained glee had tipped his sippy cup of apple juice all down my sleeve. The cloying, sweet smell was already starting to give me a headache. "Oh, you little rascal," my mother had cooed, not to me, but to Leo, as she lovingly ruffled his blonde curls. "Look at the sticky mess you made on poor Auntie Jen." The whole table, my father, Olivia, and her husband Mark, all chuckled. It was as if the boy had just performed a particularly clever trick for their amusement. Olivia, swirling a glass of Chardonnay that I had brought, gave a long, theatrical sigh that was meant to convey exhaustion but only projected entitlement. They're just a whirlwind of energy at this age. "You don't mind, right, Jen?" It was a rhetorical question, a verbal confirmation of a long-standing unspoken contract. I was the family shock absorber. I was the spill cleaner. I was the default. I muttered something that sounded like agreement and excused myself to the kitchen. The conversation didn't pause for a beat. It was a seamless flow of chatter that my absence didn't even ripple. As I stood at the sink, dabbing at my sleeve with a wet cloth, I could hear their laughter, bright and carefree. It was the sound of people who never had to worry about the details because someone else was always there to handle them. When I returned, the atmosphere had shifted. My father had taken center stage. He tapped his fork lightly against his water glass, a gesture he used to command attention. He wore his benevolent patriarch face, the one that always preceded a grand announcement that would ultimately be funded by my labor. "All right, everyone, settle down," he began, his eyes sweeping the table before landing and staying on me. "Your mother and I have been doing some thinking. It's been far too long since we had a proper family trip, all of us together, making memories." My mother clapped her hands with girlish excitement. "We've found the most incredible resort in Hawaii, right on the beach. They have villas with private pools, kids clubs, everything. It's a true slice of paradise." Olivia's eyes widened. "Hawaii, oh my God, Daddy, that's perfect. Mark and I are so burned out." "A real vacation is exactly what we need." She leaned against her husband, who was already nodding in agreement. "It's just been impossible to relax with the twins running us ragged." I watched the scene play out as if I were behind a pane of glass. I saw the entire vacation unfold in my mind's eye. The oceanfront villas charged to my American Express, the kids' club that would be deemed not stimulating enough for the boys, the endless days of me building sandcastles and applying sunscreen while Olivia and Mark went on romantic sunset cruises. My father's gaze was heavy, expectant. He wasn't asking my opinion. He was waiting for my enthusiastic consent to once again bankroll and facilitate their leisure. I looked from his face to the fading, sticky stain on my sleeve. And in that moment, something deep inside my soul, a tightly coiled spring of resentment that had been compressed by decades of silent compliance, finally, irrevocably broke. Thank you for being here with me. It takes a lot to tell this story, and knowing someone is listening makes all the difference. If you don't mind, I'd love to see where you're all from. Please drop your city in the comments below. The quiet in my childhood home was never peaceful. It was a weighted silence, the sound of a space holding its breath in anticipation of its main character's entrance. And the main character was, and always had been, my sister, Olivia. The house itself was a shrine to her existence, a meticulously curated museum of her life. The main hallway was a testament to this curation. It was a gallery wall, tracing the arc of Olivia's golden life. There she was, taking her first wobbly steps in a sun-drenched backyard. There she was in a ridiculously fluffy ballet tutu, smiling a gap-toothed grin. High school graduation, looking bored and beautiful as valedictorian. And the centerpiece, a comically oversized canvas print from her wedding day, where she looked like a fairy tale princess, my father beaming at her side as he walked her down the aisle. My life was relegated to a small, awkward corner behind the coat closet, a space that seemed to exist only as an architectural afterthought. The wall was blank. It wasn't a deliberate, malicious act of exclusion. It was something far more wounding, an emptiness born of complete and utter oversight. My accomplishments were simply not events that registered as worthy of commemoration. This dynamic was set in stone early on. When we both turned 16, the contrast was almost comical in its cruelty. For months, Olivia had been leaving car brushers around the house, all for a brand new cherry red convertible. On the morning of her birthday, it was sitting in the driveway with a giant bow on it. My parents had taken out a loan, beaming as she squealed with delight. 6 months later, for my birthday, my dad tossed a set of keys onto the kitchen table. They were for his 10-year-old sedan, a beige boat of a car that smelled faintly of stale coffee and disappointment. "It's practical," he'd said. "It'll get you to your job and back." Olivia got the dream. I got the utility. Years later, when I was 15, I won a national essay competition. It was a prestigious award, and it came with a $500 prize. It was the first time I felt a spark of pride that was entirely my own, something I had achieved through my own intellect and effort. I practically floated home, the certificate in a protective folder, the check feeling heavy and important in my pocket. I found my mother in the kitchen, on the phone, a common state of being for her. I waited patiently, my heart thumping against my ribs. When she finally hung up, I presented the certificate like a trophy. "Mom, look what I won." She took it, her eyes skimming the text, her mind clearly elsewhere. "Oh, that's very nice, honey," she said, her smile thin and distracted. Just then, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. Her entire face lit up. "Oh, it's Olivia. 1 second, sweetie. This is important." She turned her back to me, her voice dropping into that conspiratorial mother-daughter tone she reserved only for Olivia. They talked for 20 minutes about a disagreement Olivia was having with her sorority sister. I stood there, invisible, the certificate in my hand feeling increasingly flimsy and ridiculous. Later that evening, I found it on the kitchen counter, a faint, sticky ring on it where my dad had placed his beer bottle. The check was underneath, creased and forgotten. This was the rhythm of our family. My achievements were nice, footnotes in the grand narrative of Olivia's life. My needs were logistical problems to be solved with maximum efficiency, while Olivia's desires were epic quests the entire family embarked upon. When she decided she wanted a lavish wedding, my parents drained their savings. When I mentioned I was struggling to pay for textbooks for my college degree, my father, peering over the top of his newspaper, had said, "Money is tight right now, Jen. We're still paying for the wedding. You're a resourceful girl. You'll figure it out." And I did. I figured it out by working as a waitress until 2 a.m., my feet aching and my clothes smelling of grease, then waking up at 6 a.m. to study for my engineering exams. I figured it out by living on instant noodles and the sheer force of my own will. I became resourceful not because it was in my nature, but because I had no other choice. The house I grew up in hadn't raised a daughter. It had trained a very, very effective support system. The moment the camel's back finally breaks is rarely a grand, dramatic event. It's not a thunderclap. It's a quiet, internal fracture. It's a switch flipping in a dark room of your soul, suddenly illuminating a lifetime of slights in stark, unforgiving detail. For me, that illumination, that final, definitive snap, occurred on the evening of my 30th birthday. I had been explicit. All I wanted was a quiet dinner at my favorite Italian restaurant. No fuss, no party. Of course, my mother had other ideas. "Nonsense, Jennifer." She'd chirped into the phone, her voice oozing a cheerful condescension. "Turning 30 is a huge milestone. We absolutely have to celebrate you. Don't you worry about a thing. We'll handle everything." In my family, handling everything was code for, "We will organize an event that suits our own needs and preferences, and you will be expected to attend and express gratitude." The guest list was a testament to this. It was composed of my parents' friends from their country club, Olivia's in-laws, and a handful of distant relatives I barely recognized. The music was from my father's generation, the food was my mother's favorite, and the entire evening felt less like a celebration of my birth and more like a social obligation I was headlining. But the true masterpiece of passive-aggressive neglect was unveiled at the end of the night. My mother emerged from the kitchen bearing a massive sheet cake from Costco, her face aglow as she led a painfully off-key rendition of Happy Birthday. My polite, pasted-on smile began to feel brittle as she approached. Something was wrong with the cake. Through the flickering candlelight, I could see the decorative frosting, a garish swirl of primary-colored blue and pink, and the writing wasn't for me. In looping, sugary script, it read, "Happy Birthday, Leo and Max." I stared, my brain refusing to process the information. A wave of cold disbelief washed over me, so intense it felt like I'd been plunged into icy water. My mother placed the cake on the table, utterly oblivious to my stunned silence. "Well," she announced to the room at large, "the boy's birthday is just next week, so we thought, why not be efficient and celebrate everyone at once? 2 birds with 1 stone." Efficient. My 3 decades on this earth reduced to an exercise in efficiency. I watched, numb, as they plunged a knife into the cake and served the first 2 generously sized pieces to my nephews, who immediately began smearing blue frosting all over their faces. I was offered a piece much later, a pathetic, crumbling corner that was more frosting than cake. I declined. I had lost my appetite. After the cake fiasco, as the guests began to thin out, my father approached me. He was holding a crisp white envelope, and for one fleeting, idiotic moment, my heart lifted. I thought it was a card, a real gift, a sign that they hadn't completely forgotten me. He handed it to me with a magnanimous smile. "Here you are, birthday girl. We all pitched in for this." With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside were not a check or a gift card, but a sheaf of printed documents, flight confirmations, round-trip tickets to Honolulu for 4 adults, Richard, Carol, Olivia, and Mark. My name was conspicuously absent. I looked up at him, my confusion a thick fog in my head. "It's your gift to the family," he explained, his tone patient, as if speaking to a slow child. "For all of us to go on that Hawaii trip. You'll be booking your own ticket, of course, and the twins. Olivia already found the perfect seats for you 3 in the row right behind her and Mark. It will be such a huge help, Jennifer. Your sister can finally get a real, proper rest." And there it was, the click. It was so loud in my head, it was like a gunshot. It wasn't just an oversight. It was a transaction. They hadn't just forgotten my birthday. They had actively co-opted it, transforming it into the kickoff event for my next assignment, an 11-day unpaid nannying gig in a tropical location. I carefully folded the papers and placed them on the table beside the half-eaten cake. "No," I said. The word was a pebble dropped into a silent pond. My mother's smile became a thin, hard line. "Jennifer, this is your party. Don't make a scene." "I'm not making a scene," I replied. My voice was unnervingly calm, stripped of all emotion. The hurt had burned away, leaving behind something cold and hard as steel. "I'm just saying no. I'm not going." Olivia, who had been scrolling through her phone, looked up, her expression of disbelief almost comical. "You are being so unbelievable right now," she hissed. I stood up from the table, my movements deliberate. "No, Olivia," I said, my gaze sweeping over all of them, my so-called family. "For the first time in a very long time, I'm being perfectly believable. I'm being myself." I walked to the front hall, grabbed my purse and my coat. At the door, I turned back. "You've had my weekends. You've had my evenings. You have bled my bank account dry and feasted on my patience. You can have the trip, too. But you will have it without me." I walked out into the cool night air, the sound of the door closing behind me like a final, punctuating slam. I didn't run. I didn't cry. The entire drive back to my silent, empty apartment, I did something I hadn't done in years. I began to plan. For myself. The days following my birthday were shrouded in a strange, electric silence. I knew they were waiting for me to crack, for the guilt to set in, and for my inevitable, groveling apology to arrive. So I gave myself the gift of space. I muted their text thread and silenced their calls. My apartment, once just a place to sleep between obligations, transformed into a sanctuary, a command center for my own liberation. This wasn't just about saying no to a vacation. This was about dismantling a 30-year dynasty of dependence. It required a strategy. It required leverage. It required me to excavate the past. So I started digging, pulling out old file boxes from the back of my closet, searching for financial documents, anything that could help me untangle myself. And that's how I found the box. It was a simple, sturdy shoebox from a department store tucked beneath a pile of old college textbooks. In elegant, looping cursive, the lid was labeled, "From Aunt Eleanor." My Aunt Eleanor, my mother's older sister, was the North Star of my childhood. She was a brilliant, sharp-witted woman who had built a real estate empire from scratch in a world dominated by men. She never married, traveled the world, and possessed a unique ability to see straight through the family's nonsense. She had always seen me, not as a utility, but as a person. Her death from a sudden illness 2 years ago had been a devastating blow, leaving a void no one else could fill. I lifted the lid, and the scent of lavender and old paper filled the air. Inside, nestled among faded photographs of us at the zoo and a pressed gardenia from her magnificent garden, was a thick, cream-colored manila envelope. My name was written on the front. My hands were shaking as I broke the seal. The contents were a shock, a series of professionally bound documents from a prestigious law firm. It was the full accounting of a trust fund she had established for me upon her death. I scanned the pages, my eyes catching on the numbers, my brain struggling to process the zeros. It wasn't a small token of affection. It was a fortune. It was a new life, printed in black and white. It was the kind of money that didn't just buy houses and cars. It bought freedom. It bought options. But tucked behind the legal jargon was a single folded sheet of her personal stationery. A letter. Her voice, clear and strong, seemed to rise from the page as I read. "My dearest Jennifer, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and I hope you are in a place where you are ready to hear these words. I have watched you for your entire life, my fierce little sparrow. I've seen your brilliant mind and your generous heart, and I've watched with growing anger as others have treated that heart not as a treasure, but as a public well from which they can draw endlessly without ever thinking to replenish it. I say this with the sorrow of a sister, but the clarity of an outsider. Your family loves you, but they are fundamentally incapable of respecting you. They see your competence, your strength, your reliability, and they see a solution to their own shortcomings. They are like kookaburras, noisy, demanding, and they will snatch the bread right from your hands and then look at you as if you were withholding it. This money, Jennifer, is your shield. It is your fortress. It is not for them. It is not to bail your father out of another bad investment, nor is it to fund another one of Olivia's whims. I have had my lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, structure this trust like a vault. It is yours and yours alone. His number is enclosed. He is a good, loyal man who understands my wishes perfectly. Do not, for 1 second, allow them to make you feel guilty for claiming a life of your own. You have paid your dues 1,000 times over. I want you to remember this, my dear. Never set yourself on fire to keep others warm. They will only stand around and complain that the blaze isn't bright enough. Go, build your own fire. Live a life so full and bright that it honors the love I have for you. All my heart, Aunt Eleanor. I sank to the floor, the letter clutched in my hand, and I wept. The tears weren't for my aunt's passing, but for her enduring presence. It was a gut-wrenching, cleansing sob of pure validation. I wasn't selfish. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't cold-hearted. Someone had seen it all. Someone had understood. My aunt hadn't just left me an inheritance. She had left me a weapon, a strategy, and most importantly, her permission to finally fight for myself. And as I read her words again, I felt the last vestiges of my guilt burn away, leaving behind the cold, hard, and beautiful clarity of purpose. Aunt Eleanor's letter provided the moral ammunition. The next morning, I began assembling the heavy artillery. My first call was to Mr. Abernathy. His voice was exactly as I'd imagined, calm, measured, and imbued with an old-world gravitas. He expressed his condolences for my loss and then immediately got down to business, speaking of my aunt with deep respect. "Eleanor was very specific in her instructions, Miss Vance," he explained. "She foresaw a time when you would need complete financial independence. The trust is ironclad. You are the sole beneficiary and the sole trustee. No one can touch it but you." Then I told him about the joint account, the one I dutifully fed a third of my salary into every month for my parents' household expenses. I explained that my inheritance had been paid out into that very account 2 years ago, as I had provided those details to the estate, assuming it was a safe place. A long, heavy silence met me from the other end of the line. When Mr. Abernathy finally spoke, his voice was tight with professional outrage. "Let me be perfectly clear. Your inheritance should have been segregated immediately. The fact that it was commingled in an account with their names on it is highly irregular and deeply concerning. My very first piece of advice, and I urge you to do this today, is to open a new account at a completely different financial institution in your name only and transfer every single cent of the remaining trust principal into it. Do not delay." Before the clock struck noon, it was done. I sat across a polished desk from a polite, impassive bank manager, watching on a monitor as a life-altering sum of money flowed from the compromised account into my new fortified one. The sense of relief was so profound, it was a physical sensation. I felt a decade of weight lift from my shoulders. The First National Bank of Mom and Dad was officially permanently closed. But securing my future wasn't enough. I needed to document the past. I needed to understand the true cost of my silence. That evening, I transformed my dining room table from a place of quiet meals into a forensic accounting lab. Fueled by black coffee and a righteous fury I hadn't known I possessed, I embarked on an archaeological dig of my own life. I printed 5 years of bank statements, credit card bills, and sifted through countless email and text message chains. I launched a new Excel file. It was a thing of terrifying, beautiful order. I named the document, with a grim sense of satisfaction, the family debt. The columns were simple: date, expense description, beneficiary, amount, stated justification. The rows filled up with horrifying speed. January 2021. Down payment: Olivia's new SUV. Olivia, $5,000. Her old car just wasn't safe for the twins, you understand. June 2022. Emergency roof replacement. Richard and Carol, $15,000. The homeowner's insurance had a ridiculous deductible, just a temporary loan. August 2022. Las Vegas trip. Olivia and Mark, $4,250. Their anniversary, they just needed to get away from the stress. December 2023. Family Christmas gifts. All, $3,700. Just put it on your card, Jen. You get the good points. We'll pay you back in the new year. They never did. The list was a sickening litany of their wants and my compliance. Designer clothes, country club dues, expensive dinner parties, a constant stream of Venmo requests from Olivia for everything from diapers to a girls' night out I desperately need. Each transaction was a paper cut, and the spreadsheet showed me I was bleeding out. I printed everything. Every statement, every email, every pathetic, pleading text. I organized them chronologically in a thick 3-ring binder. It was heavy in my hands. It was the physical manifestation of my burden. This was never about helping family in a crisis. This was a sustained, systematic financial exploitation, cloaked in the language of love and obligation. As I snapped the binder shut late that night, the clicking sound echoed in the quiet apartment. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't ungenerous. I was a target, and now I had the evidence to prove it. In the midst of my methodical preparations, I made a critical, emotionally driven error. I trusted the wrong person. I confided in my cousin, Jessica. She was my age, and for years, she had played the role of the family's neutral observer, the Switzerland to our ongoing border disputes. After particularly infuriating family dinners, she'd be the first to text me with an eye roll emoji and a message that read, "Can you believe Olivia tonight?" Or, "Your mom is a piece of work. You're a saint for putting up with it." I mistook this shared criticism for genuine solidarity. I thought she was on my side. I was feeling isolated, the weight of my secret plan pressing down on me. I needed to talk to someone, to have another human being confirm that I wasn't overreacting. I invited her for coffee, and in the cozy corner of a bustling cafe, I laid out a carefully edited version of my story. I didn't mention the inheritance. That was my strategic advantage, a card to be kept hidden until the final play. But I told her about the Hawaii trip, about the soul-crushing birthday cake, about my decision to finally say no. Jessica was a phenomenal actress. She listened with a wide-eyed, rapt attention, her face a perfect symphony of sympathetic expressions. She gasped at the right moments, she shook her head in disbelief, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Oh, Jen, that is just monstrous," she said, her voice filled with what I thought was genuine indignation. "Good for you. It's about damn time you stood up for yourself. They've been walking all over you for years. I am so, so proud of you for doing this. If you need anything at all, you call me." Her words were like rain on parched earth. I soaked them up, feeling a profound sense of relief. I wasn't alone. I had an ally. I left that cafe feeling buoyant, my resolve strengthened by her support. That feeling of camaraderie lasted for approximately 48 hours. I was at my desk, deep in the logistics of booking my own secret getaway, a glorious first-class trip to a secluded resort in St. Bart's, when my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. It was the first direct communication since my birthday party. I had unblocked their numbers, knowing I'd need to re-engage to execute my plan. "Jennifer, dear, I know you're still upset, and we've decided to give you your space. But this silent treatment is becoming very childish. Jessica called me. She said you two had a nice chat, and she told me you're feeling very overwhelmed and stressed out lately. We understand completely. Why don't you come over for dinner on Sunday? We can put this silly Hawaii business behind us and talk things through like a rational family." I had to read the text 3 times before the words fully penetrated. Jessica called me. She told me you're feeling very overwhelmed. Overwhelmed. The word was a poison dart. It was the word Jessica had chosen to translate my righteous anger into a form my mother could understand and dismiss. Female hysteria. She had taken my declaration of independence and reframed it as a mental health crisis. She wasn't an ally. She was an informant, a double agent, feeding intelligence back to the enemy camp, confirming their deepest held beliefs about me, that I was just being emotional, that this was a temporary tantrum, and that with the right combination of condescension and feigned concern, I could be managed and brought back into the fold. The betrayal was sharp and clean, a surgical incision. But strangely, it didn't make me want to cry. It made me cold. It cauterized the last lingering nerve of family sentimentality I had left. They weren't just individuals. They were a system, an ecosystem designed to support Olivia, fueled by me. And Jessica was just another scavenger in that ecosystem, currying favor with the powers that be. But her treachery had given me a gift, an invaluable strategic advantage. They were now operating on completely faulty intelligence. They thought I was fragile, teetering on the edge of a breakdown. They were preparing a gentle intervention, armed with tea and sympathy. They had no idea I was preparing for an unconditional surrender. Theirs, not mine. The morning of the flight was a masterclass in performance art. I played my role to perfection. I had agreed to my mother's truce, allowing them to believe that their concerned, gentle pressure had worked. I told them I would ride with them to the airport so we could talk things through before the flight. They interpreted this as my imminent capitulation. The house was a whirlwind of cheerful chaos. Suitcases, a garish matching set of floral print luggage, were piled by the door. My father was barking logistical questions about baggage weight, my mother was flitting around with a clipboard, and Olivia was complaining loudly that she couldn't find her noise-canceling headphones, a clear signal that she had no intention of dealing with her own children on the plane. My own suitcase was in the trunk of my car, parked down the street. It was a discreet, elegant, charcoal gray hardshell case. It contained no juice boxes, no wet wipes, no iPads preloaded with cartoons. It contained a silk caftan, a brand new passport, a copy of a dense historical novel, and a one-way ticket to a new life. The car ride to the airport was a suffocating ordeal. It was an hour-long deluge of their greatest hits of psychological manipulation. "We're so proud of you for being the bigger person, honey," my mother said, reaching back from the front seat to pat my knee with a proprietary air. "At the end of the day, family is all that matters." "This trip is just what you need," my father added, his eyes on the traffic. "A chance to clear your head, get some perspective away from work stress." Olivia, seated beside me, leaned in conspiratorially. The scent of her expensive perfume was cloying. "I went ahead and made a schedule for who takes the boys when," she whispered, as if bestowing a great gift. "You get them for all the mornings, which is great because you're an early riser anyway. Mark and I will take over after their afternoon nap. See? Compromise." I just smiled, I nodded. I was a placid lake on the surface, but underneath, a powerful current was pulling me toward the sea. We arrived at the sprawling, chaotic international terminal. As my father began the Herculean task of unloading their mountain of luggage onto a cart, I saw my opening. "You know what? I really need to use the restroom," I announced. "There's probably a long line. I'll just meet you all at the Hawaiian Airlines check-in counter. It's right over there." "Okay, but don't take forever." My mother called out, already distracted by trying to balance another bag on the precarious luggage tower. I gave them a final, small wave, turned, and walked away. I did not go to the restroom. I kept walking, my pace steady and measured, melting into the river of travelers. I didn't look back. I navigated the terminal with the focus of a soldier on a mission, my small carry-on bag feeling light on my shoulder. I ascended an escalator to the departures level and walked to the far end of the airport to a different, quieter terminal. The polished sign above the entrance read, "First Class and International Departures." My gate was a serene oasis of calm. Leather armchairs, quiet conversation, and a panoramic view of the airfield. I sat down, took a deep breath, and pulled out my phone. My fingers were steady as they flew across the screen, typing the message I had rehearsed in my mind 100 times. I added my father, mother, Olivia, and Mark to a new group chat. "I will not be going to Hawaii. I will not be your nanny, and I will not be your bank. As of this morning, the joint account you have all been using has been closed, and its funds secured. I would strongly advise you check the balance on your own credit cards before attempting to check your bags. Enjoy your vacation." I pressed send. The word "delivered" appeared in tiny blue letters. And then, with a profound sense of finality, I powered my phone off. The screen went black. A calm female voice announced the final boarding call for my flight to St. Bart's. I stood up, walked to the counter, and handed the agent my ticket. She smiled warmly. "Enjoy your flight, Miss Vance." "I will," I said, and for the first time, I knew it was true. As I settled into my ridiculously spacious seat, a flight attendant appeared with a glass of chilled champagne. I took a sip. Through the window, far across the tarmac, I could see the distinctive, colorful tail of a Hawaiian Airlines plane. I imagined the scene at their check-in counter, the confusion, the dawning horror, the sheer, impotent rage. The thought didn't fill me with glee. It filled me with a quiet, powerful, and utterly delicious sense of peace. The plane began to move, and I was finally the pilot of my own life. St. Bart's was not just a place, it was a different state of being. The air that greeted me off the plane was a warm, humid embrace, thick with the perfume of tropical flowers and salt. The sky was an impossible, vibrant blue. It was a world away from the gray, concrete reality I had left behind. For 12 blissful hours, my phone remained off, tucked away in a drawer in my hotel room. My room was a sanctuary, a minimalist suite of white linens and dark wood with a private terrace that offered an uninterrupted view of the turquoise Caribbean Sea. I took a long shower, I ordered room service, I sat on the terrace and watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of apricot and violet. I did nothing, and it was the most productive thing I had done in years. Finally, with a deep breath and a glass of wine for fortification, I retrieved the phone. I knew what was coming. I powered it on. The device awoke with a vengeance. It shuddered in my hand, vibrating nonstop for nearly a full minute as the delayed onslaught of their fury finally broke through. The screen was a wall of red notification bubbles, 117 text messages, 42 missed calls from 4 different numbers, 12 new voicemails. It was a digital carpet bombing. With a strange, detached curiosity, I opened the group text thread and began to scroll to the top to read the story of their meltdown in chronological order. The first messages, sent moments after mine, were laced with confused disbelief. "What is this? Jen, this isn't funny." My mother. "What do you mean the account is closed? The agent here says all our cards are being declined." Then, as the reality of their situation began to sink in, the confusion morphed into frantic annoyance. "Jennifer, whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. Now turn the cards back on. The boys are getting fussy. This is seriously not the time for one of your moods. We are going to miss our flight." And then, after a gap of about 15 minutes, a period I imagined was filled with frantic phone calls to banks, the dam of their civility burst completely. The messages became a torrent of pure, undiluted rage. "How dare you? After everything we have done for you, how dare you do this to your family?" My father, in all caps. "The money is gone, all of it." "What did you do with our money, Jennifer? What did you do?" "I cannot believe you are this cruel. My boys were so excited for this vacation. They are crying their eyes out in the middle of the airport. You are a monster. You are an ungrateful, selfish child. We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us? With public humiliation? You have shamed this entire family." My father doubling down. The texts devolved from there into a pathetic spiral of threats, insults, and tearful, manipulative pleas. I could practically see the scene, my father, red-faced and sputtering, jabbing at his phone screen, my mother weeping theatrically for the benefit of onlookers, Olivia trying to manage her screaming children while simultaneously firing off volleys of vitriol. The very last message, the one that sat at the bottom of the long, ugly scroll, was from Olivia. It had been sent just an hour before I turned my phone on. "I hope you're happy wherever you are. You didn't just ruin our vacation, you've ruined my life." I read her words and I felt the ghost of an old reflex, the urge to apologize, to smooth things over, to take her pain and make it my own. But the ghost was weak and the new me was strong. I looked out at the vast, peaceful ocean. Her life wasn't ruined. Her line of credit was. Her unpaid assistant had resigned. Her safety net had been removed, and she was terrified of the fall. With a slow, deliberate movement, I highlighted the entire conversation thread. My thumb hovered over the trash can icon. This was more than deleting a text message. This was erasing a lifetime of emotional debt. I pressed down. A small pop-up asked, "Delete this conversation?" I smiled. "Delete," I whispered to myself, and tapped the screen. I did the same for the call log. I deleted every voicemail without listening. I wiped the slate clean. My phone, once a conduit for their demands, was now just a tool for my own use. The silence it offered was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. My week in St. Bart's was less a vacation and more a deep programming. I was unlearning a lifetime of habits. I learned to sleep until I was rested, not until I was needed. I learned to read a book on the beach for hours without the gnawing anxiety that my phone would buzz with an urgent, non-emergency from my sister. I learned to order a table for one, not as a statement of loneliness, but as an act of quiet rebellion. I was rediscovering the person I was before I had been subsumed by the role of good daughter and reliable sister. On my last day, I bought a small, delicate silver pendant shaped like a seashell from a street artisan. It was a tangible anchor for the feeling I wanted to hold on to, the quiet strength, the salty air of freedom. But I was not naive. I knew the peace I had found on that island was a temporary ceasefire, not a permanent treaty. The return journey was a flight back into the storm's path. I was careful. I flew into a different airport than the one I'd left from. I took a taxi, not a rideshare. I told no one my travel plans, but I had underestimated the sheer, stubborn tenacity of their entitlement. As the taxi rounded the corner onto my street, my stomach dropped. There they were, all four of them, my mother, my father, Olivia, and her husband, Mark, were standing on the sidewalk in front of my apartment building. They weren't pacing or looking around. They were just standing there, a grim, silent tableau of resentment, waiting. It was a planned ambush. For a heartbeat, the old fear kicked in. My instinct was to tell the driver to keep going, to run, to hide. But then I looked down at the seashell pendant I was wearing. I thought of Aunt Eleanor's letter. I thought of the feeling of the plane lifting off the runway. The fear receded, replaced by a cold, weary resolve. I had run far enough. It was time to stand my ground. I paid the driver, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the cab. I pulled my sleek, gray suitcase from the trunk and began walking towards them, the wheels clicking softly on the pavement. Their faces were a study in barely contained rage. They looked exhausted, their skin sallow, their eyes ringed with dark circles. The humiliation at the airport had clearly taken its toll. "Jennifer." My father's voice was a low growl. He stepped forward, physically blocking my path to the front door of my building. He was trying to reassert his dominance, to use his physical presence to intimidate me. "You are going to get in our car. We are going to your mother's house, and you are going to sit down and explain this madness." "No," I said. My voice was quiet, but it did not waver. My hand was firm on the handle of my suitcase. "I'm not going anywhere with you. I live here. I'm home. Any conversation that needs to be had can be had inside, or not at all. Your choice." The defiance in my tone clearly rattled them. They had expected me to be cowed, apologetic. After a tense standoff that lasted for a small eternity, my father finally stepped aside, his jaw tight with fury. I walked past them, unlocked the door, and held it open. They followed me in, a grim procession, and crowded into my small, serene apartment. The air immediately felt thick, contaminated by their presence. My sanctuary had been breached. They didn't wait for me to put my bag down. The verbal assault began instantly. "What in God's name were you thinking?" my mother shrieked, her voice shrill. "To do that to us, to your family, to steal our money and abandon us in an airport." "I didn't steal anything, Mom," I said, turning to face them. "I reclaimed what was mine." "That money was the family emergency fund," my father boomed, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "We all relied on that. You had no right to just take it. It was an act of profound selfishness." Olivia, who had been glaring at me with pure hatred, finally unleashed her own venom. "Our vacation, Jen, the one break we were going to get all year. Do you have any idea how hard it is to explain to two 4-year-olds that the trip to see the volcanoes is canceled? Do you even care that you broke their little hearts?" Mark, her smug husband, stepped forward, attempting to take on the role of the calm, rational arbiter. "This isn't about a vacation, Jennifer. This is about a pattern of irresponsible and hurtful behavior. You have a duty to your family. You shirked that duty. You abandoned them." It was a perfectly coordinated attack, a full press of guilt, shame, and blame. Every word was a carefully chosen weapon honed by years of practice. They were trying to back me into a corner, to overwhelm my defenses until I broke down and gave them what they wanted: remorse and access to my bank account. But the woman who had left for St. Bart's was not the same woman who had returned. I listened to their tirade, and I didn't hear valid criticisms. I heard the panicked squeals of parasites whose host had just been ripped away. I let them talk until they had exhausted their initial fury, until they were just breathing heavily in the silence. Then I walked over to the sturdy oak bookshelf against my wall, reached behind a row of books, and pulled out the thick, heavy binder, my fortress of receipts. I walked back to the coffee table and placed it between us. The sound it made, a solid, definitive thud, was the opening bell for a fight they had no idea was coming. "You want to talk about duty?" I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "You want to talk about what is owed? Let's talk." The binder on the table was an alien object in the room. It was thick, black, and radiated an aura of cold, hard fact that was completely at odds with their emotional, hysterical narrative. They stared at it, then at me, their tirade momentarily forgotten, replaced by a wary confusion. "What is this?" my father demanded, his voice laced with suspicion. "Some kind of stunt? More of your dramatics?" "It's not a stunt," I replied, my voice as cold and level as a frozen lake. "It's a ledger. It's a full and complete accounting of my duty to this family." As if on cue, my apartment's intercom buzzed. A jolt of panic went through the room. My mother's eyes darted towards the door. "Who is that? Did you call the police? Jennifer, what did you do?" The idea that I might bring in an outside authority was clearly terrifying to them. "Relax," I said, walking to the intercom. "It's just a business associate." I buzzed him in. A minute later, there was a firm knock on my door. I opened it to find Mr. David Chen standing in the hallway. He was my father's longtime business partner, a man my father both admired and feared. Mr. Chen was a pillar of the business community, a man whose reputation for integrity was legendary. He was dressed in an impeccable suit, and his calm, intelligent eyes took in the entire scene in a single sweeping glance. "David," my father choked out, his face going slack with shock. "What on earth are you doing here?" "Good afternoon, Richard." "Carol, Olivia," Mr. Chen said, his voice a calm baritone. He stepped inside, giving them a polite but cool nod. Jennifer was kind enough to invite me. She informed me there was a significant family financial dispute and felt that an objective, third-party perspective might be beneficial. The shift in the room's energy was instantaneous and profound. My family's power was rooted in the privacy of their home, in the closed-door sessions where they could bully and manipulate without witnesses. The presence of Mr. Chen, a man whose respect my father desperately craved, changed the game entirely. This was no longer a family squabble. It was an audit. I returned to my position behind the coffee table, a general addressing her troops. I opened the binder. "You accuse me of theft," I began, my voice clear and strong. "You claim the money in that account was family money. This binder documents the last 5 years of that account's activity." I flipped to the first page, a neatly printed summary sheet. In that time, my direct deposits from my salary have totaled $482,000. My contributions to your mortgage, utilities, and property taxes, which I paid directly from my personal account, totaled an additional $90,000. The withdrawals made by you for non-essential personal expenses total $154,321.17. A collective strangled gasp came from the couch. "That's impossible. It's a lie," Olivia sputtered. "Is it?" I shot back. I flipped to a tab marked Olivia. "On April 12th, 2023, you requested $2,000 via text for what you called an emergency root canal. I have the text here." I held up the printout. "And I have the corresponding credit card statement from that same day, showing a $2,000 charge at the Neiman Marcus handbag department." I didn't give her time to respond. I turned to my father. "Dad, on September 3rd, 2022, you transferred $10,000 to your personal brokerage account. You told me it was a short-term loan for a business opportunity. This binder contains the statement from that brokerage account showing the $10,000 was used to cover significant losses from a high-risk tech stock you had invested in against Mr. Hutchin. Chen's advice. Isn't that right?" My father's face was the color of ash. Mr. Chen's expression was granite. "You see," I continued, my voice rising with the force of 30 years of suppressed truth, "you treated that account like your own personal slush fund. And you want to know the most disgusting part? The real reason the well ran dry?" I paused, making sure I had every ounce of their attention. 2 years ago, when Aunt Eleanor passed away, she left me a substantial inheritance. That inheritance, my legacy from her, was deposited into that account. You have been carelessly, thoughtlessly, and selfishly burning through it. You used her memory to pay for your country club dues and your Botox appointments. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the hum of my own refrigerator. My mother looked like she was going to faint. But I wasn't finished. I had one more receipt. I turned my gaze to Mark, who had been trying to make himself invisible. "And Mark, I know you've been pressuring Olivia to get money from me for months. And I know why. I hired a private investigator. I know all about your $50,000 online gambling debt and the people you owe it to." The last vestige of color drained from Mark's face. Olivia whipped her head around to stare at her husband, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. The ambush had been turned back on them. The hunters were now the prey, and the trap they had set for me had just snapped shut on them. The word inheritance hung in the air, a final, fatal charge. It recontextualized their greed from mere entitlement into something far more ghoulish. They hadn't just been spending my money. They had been dancing on my aunt's grave without even knowing it. The sight of their shattered faces, the complete and utter devastation in their eyes should have filled me with a sense of victorious vindication. But what I felt instead was a profound, hollow exhaustion. The fight was over, and I was just tired. Mr. Chen was the first to find his voice. He was no longer a neutral observer. He was a judge who had heard the evidence and was now preparing to deliver the verdict. He looked at my father, a man he had known and worked with for decades, and his expression was one of cold, clinical disgust. "Richard," he said, his voice quiet but carrying immense weight. "Tell me this isn't true. Tell me you did not allow your daughter's inheritance, Eleanor's legacy, to be squandered like this?" My father, the booming patriarch, the man who had always had an answer for everything, was utterly broken. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He just stared at the floor, a captain who had been caught looting his own ship. Mr. Chen shook his head slowly, a gesture of finality. He had seen all he needed to see. He then turned his attention to me, and his gaze softened. It was a look of pure, unadulterated respect. "Jennifer," he said, his voice now imbued with a surprising warmth, "your father, ironically, used to boast about your design projects at the firm. He saw your talent as a reflection on him. He was right about the talent, but wrong about its source. You are a brilliant architect. You are wasting your gifts at that corporate behemoth." He let that sink in before continuing. "Our firm has been exploring the possibility of funding a new independent design division, focusing on sustainable community projects. If you have ever considered striking out on your own, of building something that is truly yours, I would be honored to be your first investor. I don't invest in balance sheets. I invest in character and integrity. You, young lady, have them in spades." It was a life raft thrown to someone who hadn't even realized she was drowning. It was more than a job offer. It was a recognition of my value, a validation so complete and unexpected that it felt like a physical force, pushing the shame and doubt of a lifetime out of my body. At the sound of Mr. Chen's offer, a strangled noise escaped my father's lips. He looked up, his eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic plea. He saw his business, his reputation, his entire world crumbling, and he saw his partner handing the tools to rebuild to the very daughter he had so carelessly demolished. While my future was suddenly, miraculously expanding, their world was collapsing in on itself. Olivia had turned on Mark, her voice a low, venomous hiss. "A gambling debt? $50,000? Is that where the money for the house down payment went? Is that why our cards are always maxed out? You've been lying to me this whole time?" Mark stammered and blustered, but his guilt was a stench in the room. The facade of their perfect, golden couple marriage was disintegrating in real time. My mother, meanwhile, was just sitting on the couch, rocking back and forth like a frightened child, whispering, "I didn't know. I didn't know." It no longer mattered if it was true. Her ignorance was a willful, cultivated blindness she had nurtured for 30 years. Mr. Chen had buttoned his suit jacket, a clear signal that the meeting was over. "Richard, you can expect a call from my legal team on Monday morning. We will begin the process of dissolving our partnership immediately." He then turned to me and gave me a slight, respectful bow of his head. "Jennifer, my offer is a serious one. Take some time. Call me when you're ready." And with that, he was gone. He left a silence in his wake that was heavier than any shouting match. It was a silence filled with the wreckage of their choices. My father, who had entered my apartment an hour earlier with the swagger of a king, now looked like a beggar. He made a strange, wounded sound, and then he slumped forward in the armchair, burying his face in his hands. The sound of his ragged, gut-wrenching sobs was the last sound I heard before I asked them all to leave my home. Thank you for staying with me through that. It wasn't easy to relive, but it's important. You are a truly wonderful and patient person for listening this far. If you've been on this journey with me, please do me a small favor and press that like button, and then comment with the number 1 down below. It just lets me know that you're still here with me. Your support is a light in the dark. Please comment with a 1 and let me tell you how this story ends. Getting them to leave was surprisingly easy. There was no fight left in them. They were like ghosts, their anger and entitlement exorcised, leaving behind only hollow shells of shame. They shuffled out of my apartment without another word, not looking at me, not looking at each other. I closed and locked the door behind them, and then I leaned my forehead against the cool wood. I inhaled a deep, shuddering breath that felt like the first real lungful of air I had taken in 30 years. The war was over. I had survived. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of controlled, purposeful chaos. I called Mr. Chen. I accepted his offer. I resigned from the corporate architecture firm where I had been a competent but invisible cog for nearly a decade. With the help of Mr. Chen's lawyers and my own remaining inheritance as seed money, I filed the incorporation papers for Vance Design Studio. I rented a small, sunlit office space in a renovated brick building downtown. I spent my days drafting a business plan and my nights sketching ideas for my first projects. The exhaustion was profound, but it was a good exhaustion. The satisfying ache of building something from the ground up, something that was mine. I also moved. My old apartment, my former sanctuary, now felt tainted by the memory of that final, ugly confrontation. I found a new place, a spacious loft with exposed brick walls and massive, floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. It had a small wrought iron balcony just big enough for a chair and a small table. It was the first home I had ever chosen purely for myself, a space that didn't need to accommodate anyone else's needs or tastes. About a month into my new life, a letter with my mother's familiar, spidery handwriting arrived. I almost threw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. It was 4 pages of rambling, self-pitying prose. It was filled with excuses disguised as apologies. "I never meant for you to feel unloved," she wrote. "I just always saw you as the strong one. Olivia was always so fragile, so needy. I thought you understood." She spoke of the importance of family, of forgiveness, of letting go of the past. It ended with a desperate, heartbreakingly plea. "We have lost so much. Please don't let us lose you too. Can't we just try to be a family again?" I read the letter through once, then folded it and placed it in a box of things I no longer needed. I did not reply. An apology is not an apology when it's still centered on the apologizer's feelings. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry for the consequences she was now facing. Forgiveness, I realized, is not a gift you give to someone who has hurt you. It is a state of peace you achieve for yourself, and I was not there yet. What I needed was not reconciliation. It was distance. My first official project was a pro bono design for a new community library in a low-income neighborhood. It was a project that filled me with a sense of purpose that no corporate high-rise ever could. One afternoon, as I was pinning sketches to a large corkboard in my new home office, my fingers brushed against the seashell pendant I still wore around my neck. I took it off and pinned it to the corner of the board. It was a small, quiet object, but its significance was monumental. It was my memorial to the woman I used to be and a cornerstone for the woman I was becoming. Severing a limb, even a gangrenous one, is a painful process. For months, I felt phantom pains. I'd see a funny meme and have the fleeting urge to send it to the family group chat, only to remember that the chat no longer existed. I'd walk past a toy store and instinctively think about what my nephews might like for their birthday before the cold reality set in. These were the deeply grooved neural pathways of a lifetime of conditioning, and they would take time to fade. But with each passing week, the silence grew less like a void and more like a peaceful open space. The constant, low-grade hum of anxiety that had been the soundtrack to my life for as long as I could remember had finally stopped. I was no longer on high alert, waiting for the next manufactured crisis, the next demand disguised as a request. News of their new lives reached me in sporadic, second-hand bursts, usually from a well-meaning but gossipy distant cousin. The fallout from that afternoon in my apartment had been total and devastating. As Mr. Chen had promised, he had dissolved his partnership with my father. Without his partner's capital and reputation, my father's already struggling business imploded. The bank foreclosed on their house, the house I grew up in, the museum dedicated to Olivia. The cousin mentioned seeing the for sale sign go up, followed weeks later by an estate sale where strangers picked through the remnants of their life, the artifacts of my childhood sold off for pennies on the dollar. My parents were now living in a small, two-bedroom rental condo in a less desirable part of town. The life of casual luxury they had always taken for granted, a life built on a foundation of my money and Aunt Eleanor's legacy, had vanished. For Olivia and Mark, the implosion was even more personal. The revelation of his massive gambling debt was the final, fatal blow to their already fragile marriage. Their separation was immediate, and the subsequent divorce was, I heard, incredibly ugly. Mark, stripped of the family safety net, declared bankruptcy. Olivia, who had never worked a day in her life that wasn't a hobby job she quit after a few months, was now facing the terrifying reality of being a single mother with no marketable skills. The cousin told me, in a hushed, sympathetic tone, that she had seen Olivia working the checkout line at a local grocery store. She said Olivia looked tired. Her hands, which had always been so perfectly manicured, were chapped and red. She was also cleaning offices at night to make ends meet. A part of me, a deeply buried vestigial part, felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly extinguished by a stronger, clearer notion, a sense of equilibrium. This wasn't a punishment I had doled out. This was simply cause and effect. This was the universe balancing its books. They had lived their lives on credit, drawing from my emotional and financial accounts without a thought. The bill had finally come due. Tonight, I am sitting on the balcony of my new apartment. The city spreads out before me, a breathtaking carpet of glittering lights. A cool breeze blows, and in my hand, I hold a glass of good red wine. My life is quiet now, but it is a rich, resonant quiet. It is a life filled with work that I love, with friendships that are based on mutual respect, and with the simple, profound joy of my own, uninterrupted thoughts. I don't think about my family with anger anymore. I think of them with a kind of sad finality. Their greatest theft wasn't the money. It was the space they occupied. For 30 years, they took up so much room in my head, my heart, and my schedule that there was no space left for me to grow. They defined my borders, and I had finally, painfully redrawn them. The little seashell pendant from St. Lucia, Bart's, is now framed and hangs on the wall of my office. It's a daily reminder. It reminds me that true freedom doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It arrives in a quiet moment of decision, in the click of a suitcase latch, in the booking of a single ticket. It comes when you stop trying to earn a place at a table where you were never truly welcome. And it stays when you finally stop apologizing for taking up space in the world. My family thought I ruined their vacation. They were wrong. What I ruined was the illusion that had held all of us captive for so long. And in the wreckage, I didn't find bitterness or regret. I found myself. And from up here, with the whole world spread out before me, the view is spectacular. I am truly, deeply grateful for your time and for sharing this space with me. If you made it all the way to the very end, please comment with the letter A below, so I know you were here for the whole journey. You are a rare and special kind of person. If this story moved you in any way, I would love to read your thoughts. And please, feel free to click on another video on this channel to enjoy more of our stories. Thank you again.